Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report today. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Let's get right to today's top stories. A group of parents spoke out today at the National School Board Association headquarters. They're pushing back against being labeled as domestic terrorists for having a voice in what is being taught at their children's schools. With coronavirus vaccines slated to be approved for children between the ages of 5 and 11, it has many parents on edge, wondering if this could lead to vaccine mandates for their kids. We have physician and Maryland Congressman Andy Harris here with us to discuss. We spoke to Congressman Jim Jordan about his upcoming book about some of the inner workings of Washington, D.C. We also asked him whether or not he thinks the NIH knowingly funded gain-of-function research in the Wuhan lab. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen spoke remotely with China's top trade negotiator Liu He on Monday. According to China's Ministry of Commerce, Liu expressed concerns about U.S. tariffs, sanctions, and U.S. treatment of Chinese companies. These discussions came 1 month after Liu pushed the U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai to cancel U.S. tariffs implemented by the Trump administration. Under that agreement, China only met part of its obligation to purchase additional U.S. goods and services. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen also caught some attention this week when she suggested that the government could start targeting unrealized capital gains. This would be an unprecedented shift. Congressman Jim Jordan is a ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee. We had a chance to catch up with him and get his take. Congressman Jim Jordan, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Good to be with you, Steve.
Now, Congressman, you always have your sleeves rolled up, whether literally or figuratively. You have a new book coming out. The title's called Do What You Said You Would Do, Fighting for Freedom in the Swamp. It's a very fitting title.
Well, I mean, I always say I think we make this job too complicated. What did you tell the voters you were going to do when you ran for the office? If they elect you, go do what you said. You know, go fight for the things you told them you were going to fight for, the things they elected you to do as their representative. So we tell some stories. I think your viewers and your readers are going to like to read if they get it. You can go to Amazon and get it. Then go to Barnes and Noble. But we tell the story of the Freedom Caucus. We talk about the big investigations that I've been involved with from the IRS targeting to Benghazi to all the way through impeachment. We spend a lot of time on impeachment. We tell the story when my colleagues stormed the bunker in the basement of the Capitol, and we were down there for a deposition, and Income, Scalise, and Gates, and all these guys, and how Adam Schiff reacted. And so I think they'll like it, and I really think they'll like the interactions that we talk about with President Trump, who did what he said he was going to do. No, we've not had a president do more of what he told the American people he was going to do than President Trump. And he did it going against amazing odds, every Democrat against him, everyone in the mainstream press, all the bureaucracy, some of the Republicans, and still got so much accomplished. And we sort of take you behind the scenes, some of the things that happened with the president, which I know your viewers and readers will enjoy.
Now, Congressman, I want to ask you about some recent comments that were made by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. She said that she's considering going after unrealized capital gains. Yeah. How unprecedented is this, and what are the implications?
Well, the implications are huge, and while this is not a direct attack on your First Amendment liberties, it is a direct attack on your liberty, because when they take your property, take your wealth, and do it in this way, I mean, this is going to have a huge impact. And I'm just starting to understand. We just heard it. You know, Yellen made these comments. But this is going to hurt middle-class investors. I mean, you got to pay taxes on your capital gains that you haven't even sold the stock or sold whatever, and we don't know what the language is going to be. But this is a grab of people's wealth, and like so many of these things, when they write the tax code and they do this, and they say they're going to go after the wealthy, it always seems to, in the end, hurt middle-class families, and that troubles me as well. So this is another bad idea. But tell me one good idea they've had. I mean, the Biden, this is the worst 10 months start of any new administration in the history of the country, I think. And they've done everything wrong. So here's just one more stupid, crazy economic principle or economic policy. I mean, think about their basic economic plan. Their basic economic plan has been lock down the economy, spend like crazy, pay people not to work, and if you have been working, we're now going to raise your taxes. And we're going to bring this new tax, which is going to really grab your wealth. Such a deal. You know, this is how, again, ridiculous this administration is.
I just want to switch gears for a second and ask you about China and the origins of the virus. Is it possible that the NIH, the National Institute of Health, knowingly funded gain of research in the Wuhan lab?
Yeah, I think it now seems almost more than possible. It seems like it's likely, based on what we learned last week, where they gave Fauci's organization and NIH gave money to EcoHealth. EcoHealth did in fact do gain of function. We got that letter from NIH confirming that. They do, well, at least that's what it certainly appears to be, that they did gain of function research. They didn't comply with the grant by doing gain of function research, and they didn't comply with the reporting under the grant proposal. They were 2 years late in reporting what they were supposed to be doing, that they had engaged in this kind of research. And then the NIH, they gave them 5 days, and I think that's due this Wednesday, for a response on what else may have been happening. So EcoHealth is supposed to send that to us. All that while, that 2 years that they didn't report as they were required under the original grant, they got $21 million of American tax money to continue to do who knows what, because they weren't complying with the reporting requirements. So when you put all that together, plus the fact that on January 31st, Dr. Fauci gets an email, January 31st of 2020, so a year and a half ago, more than a year and a half ago, Dr. Fauci gets an email from Christian Anderson, one of these virologists who also received your tax dollars over the last several years. And in that email, he says to Dr. Fauci, virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory. And I always say that is a fancy way of saying this thing came from a lab. So it probably came from the lab. Was it this EcoHealth stuff? We don't know, but this needs to be investigated. And what did Fauci do after he got that email more than a year and a half ago? For the whole last year and a half, he's downplayed that. No, it didn't come from a lab. It was a bat to a pangolin to a hippopotamus to Joe Rogan to people. You know, it's like we're all crazy conspiracy theorists, even though this now, everything points to the lab and the fact that they were deceiving us. So we got some serious questions we want to ask NIH, and in particular Mr. Fauci, but Dr. Fauci doesn't seem to want to come back in front of our committee anymore.
Congressman Jim Jordan, thank you.
You bet, Steve, thank you.
A Virginia judge on Monday found a teenage boy guilty of sexually assaulting a classmate in the girls' bathroom. The crime took place in Stonebridge High School in Ashburn back in May. A second charge against the boy filed in October is still pending. The victim's father says that the family is planning on suing the Loudoun County school system. Dozens of students staged a walkout on Tuesday in protest of recent sexual assault cases within the school system. Today, a group of parents were speaking out at the National School Board Association headquarters. This is in response to being labeled by the government as domestic terrorists for speaking up at local school board meetings when they disagree about what's going on in schools, such as critical race theory and controversial sex education. NTD's Melina Wisecup reports from Virginia.
I'm here in Alexandria, Virginia, right outside of the National School Board Association headquarters, where a group of parents just gathered to respond to the federal government's efforts to crack down on parents who are trying to get more involved in what their kids are learning in the classroom. Now, these moms' message is simple. They refuse to co-parent with the federal government.
You have poked Mama Bear. The lionesses are awake. And this is a movement like you've never seen, because we're fighting for our kids.
It all started with a letter from the National School Boards Association calling on the Biden administration to send several federal law enforcement agencies to assess and stop what they called threats and acts of violence from certain parents, or what they referred to as domestic terrorists.
Because of the mere fact that parents are simply standing up for their children, simply speaking up peacefully in using their First Amendment rights. But let's be clear, if there were be an altercation in these school board meetings, there's the local police. You work with your community. You don't get the FBI involved in what would be a school board meeting.
In their letter, the association cited a few examples to justify their need for federal involvement. For example, an Illinois man was arrested for disorderly conduct at a school board meeting. But a Rhode Island mom tells us she was targeted by her school board for simply asking questions.
And when I did submit public records requests, my own school board turned around and publicly threatened to sue me for submitting what they thought were too many public records requests. I was just starting out by participating in education because my daughter was just entering kindergarten, and they sent a very clear message to me that if you ask too many questions and you take up too much of our time and you threaten our political agenda, we will come after you.
So why did she and these other moms start asking questions? Well, they're concerned that their children are being fed material that's harmful to their spiritual and mental well-being, such as vulgar sex education.
So you are tapping into a child's being on so many levels. And I believe very strongly can set children up for being susceptible to sexual abuse and also even sexual addiction.
Teaching and exposing children to pedophilia that are explicitly explaining rape and incest, these things should not be taught to children at all.
Then there's critical race theory, which is technically not taught as official material in K-12 schools, but these parents say it's deceptively woven into the lessons.
And she divided them into two groups and told the white kids and the privileged kids, you guys are the oppressors, and the other kids, you guys are the oppressed. And that is in a science class. So
we reject Marxism and communism.
And this former California public school teacher pinpoints exactly how the communist playbook has played out in America.
The communists have these 45 goals that were read into our congressional record in 1963. Get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. And number 41, the most disgusting of all, emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Goal number 25, break down cultural standards of morality. Thus, comprehensive sexuality education and all the other pornography they're bringing into our schools. So this is a battle between good and evil, and we're on the side of good. And what's going on in our schools is evil. So it's a righteous fight because we're fighting against evil.
Now she and other parents across the country are continuing to stand up for their kids. Reporting in Virginia, Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
The Biden administration is ending the U.S. travel ban still in place for dozens of countries, while launching new restrictions affecting U.S. citizens. The ban for China, Iran, Brazil, South Africa, India, and European nations will be lifted on November 8th. All travelers to the U.S., regardless of citizenship, will need to be fully vaccinated against COVID-19, show vaccination status, and have a negative COVID-19 test performed 3 days before departure. Both digital and paper proof of vaccination will be accepted by international airlines. The U.S. will accept any COVID-19 vaccine approved by the Food and Drug Administration or the World Health Organization. Unvaccinated travelers, including U.S. citizens with no proof of vaccination, will need to show a negative test result within 1 day of departure. Government advisors from the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, are considering the effects of COVID-19 vaccines on children. The Food and Drug Administration is considering COVID-19 vaccine safety and efficacy for children 5 to 11 years old. A new study conducted on elementary school children shows that 1/3 of an adult dose would be 91% effective. The U.S. has 100 reported child deaths from COVID-19, while the CDC data shows that U.S. child mortality is still more likely from the flu and pneumonia. With vaccines set to receive government authorization to be administered to children under the age of 11 in the coming weeks, we have Congressman Andy Harris, who also happens to be a physician, here with us to discuss. Congressman Andy Harris, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Absolutely. It's good to be with you.
Congressman, first I want to ask you, there were some state senators in your home state of Maryland calling for mandatory vaccinations for students. This did receive some pushback from the health secretary in your state. Do you think this is a necessary measure?
No, I don't. Certainly, if one of the students is at high risk from a medical illness they have, or maybe some immunodeficiency they have, then certainly they should probably get the vaccine. But to mandate it for all students, again, I have some concerns about that. Again, I think a lot of parents will agree to have their children vaccinated. But those who have any concerns, again, I find it hard to believe that we need that vaccine mandate.
Now, Congressman, you're a physician. In your professional opinion, is the vaccine safe for kids? And have there been any studies done?
Well, we certainly don't know what the long-term consequences of the vaccine are, because it's only been a matter of months since children have gotten this vaccine, because, of course, the early studies done now nearly a year and a half ago were done only in adults. So again, we really don't know what the long-term consequences are. We do know that in most children who are not at particularly high risk, that the risk of COVID is actually not that high. It's really akin to the risk during a normal flu season. And, if there is a reason that a child should get the vaccine, either to protect themselves or perhaps to protect someone who lives in their household who is at high risk, who for some reason is immunocompromised and can't get vaccinated adequately. That's very different from vaccinating a normal, healthy child, again, for whom this risk is the risk of the disease is quite low, and for whom the long-term consequences really have not been studied. We can guess, we can estimate, but they really haven't been studied, especially with a class of vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, that really are novel. So again, if there's risk, that's fine, but if there isn't high risk, then I think this risk-benefit analysis really does have to be taken into consideration.
Congressman Harris, many of these vaccine mandates are set to come due in the coming weeks. You represent the state of Maryland, which is home to many federal employees and others who will be affected by these mandates. What are you hearing from these folks?
So there are two things I'm hearing. The first thing I'm hearing is that for people who've had the disease and who have naturally acquired immunity, there is no reason to get a vaccine. The fact of the matter is the science is becoming very clear that naturally acquired immunity actually is better than vaccine-acquired immunity. The second thing is that there are always going to be 15 or 20% of Americans who will just resist the government mandate. They just won't get the vaccine, whether or not they've had naturally acquired immunity or not. And the consequences of taking those people out of the workplace, for instance, is going to be very broad, very widespread, and I think very bad for our economy. So I think these broad mandates without, for instance, if someone doesn't want to get the vaccine, then you should have, just ask them to be tested every few days. Make sure that if they're tested, they again, quarantine themselves. But again, a vaccine mandate that doesn't take into account naturally acquired immunity and doesn't allow an exception either for religious, medical reasons or with a test-out option, I think in the long run are going to be shown to be more harmful than helpful.
Physician and Congressman Andy Harris, thank you.
Thank you.
And coming up, a former military officer at the Pentagon joins us on why he has resigned from his post in protest. He'll also tell us why China should be seen as an adversary and not a competitor. A new bipartisan bill was introduced asking to convene a national White House conference to address hunger and nutrition. House Democrats are now pushing a bill to expand Social Security benefits. Congress hasn't enhanced Social Security in 50 years. And Democrat Congressman John Larson tells NTD now is the time to update these benefits.
The #1 anti-poverty program for children and the elderly is Social Security. So for Congress not to have acted in 50 years to enhance those benefits, if the poverty level is $12,800 currently, that means 5 million Americans are getting less than that in a check for the work that they've done all their lives and paid into a system. Why is that? Because Congress has never adjusted the payment schedule the way it needs to be.
Right now, Social Security benefits are expected to be insolvent by 2034, which means some recipients would see a 20% cut in benefits. This new bill would avoid depletion. It would increase the amount given to recipients now, along with extending dependent benefits to cover students up to 26 years old. It also provides caregiver credits and increases benefits for widows. They'd pay for it by taxing wealthy Americans with a payroll tax. A high-ranking military officer working for the United States military has recently resigned from his post. On September 2nd, Nicholas Yellen resigned from his post at the Pentagon in hopes to draw the attention of the nation to the rising threat of the Chinese Communist Party. Here's part of what he had to say. Nicholas Yellen, former Air Force and Space Force Chief Software Officer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Nicholas, you have recently resigned from your post. There's been different interpretations as to why. Is it fair to say that it was in protest of the lack of fight or drive that you saw within the United States government to challenge China?
No, absolutely, and you know, we've seen great pockets of success in the department during the last 3 years, and we demonstrated a small group of people can really impact change in the behemoth that is the Department of Defense, and that was exciting to see. But at the same time, I've been hearing our Pentagon leaders say the right things but walk the talk, and so effectively what we want to see now is action and making sure the sense of urgency is taken seriously. And we want to take a look at specifically what we can do to empower our airmen to have a chance of competing against China 15 to 20 years from now.
So let me ask you, I want your thoughts as to why and how you think that we've gotten into this situation.
Well, you know, I think the issue you see is often the bureaucracy, the silos and egos getting in the way in the government. Too often what we have is a lack of agility with people that have not received any training in 22 years, moving away from the traditional waterfall process, which really is designed to have a 5-year requirement cycle and very short and slow delivery process of capability, often missing all of the desired outcomes after spending so much time trying to figure things out without having an ability to deploy the capabilities in the hands of the warfighters in a continuous fashion to get that feedback loop and accelerate that delivery of capability. And so what we're trying to push now is this common sense, agile implementation where we would incrementally build capabilities, demonstrate whether or not it's working, and continuously implement it in production in the hands of the warfighter to get that feedback. Instead, what you see is often silos and egos getting in a way where you see the Army leadership, for example, refusing to partner with the Air Force on the cloud capabilities and on DevSecOps, which is this continuous capability to build software and deliver software in production. And instead, the Army leadership decided to stop the engagements and create their own cloud in a vacuum in silos, effectively compounding the talent problem we see and compounding the lack of access to best of breed capabilities from the commercial side as well.
And on that note, just how far behind do you think the United States is in terms of getting their, thoughts up to speed on just how much of a threat China is?
Well, I think we're right at the point where China is now taking us over when it comes to AI and cybersecurity. So it's still pretty early, but what you also know, of course, is the size of China having 1.5 billion people compounds the problem. And with AI, the faster you can deliver capabilities in production and the more data you get to train that artificial intelligence capability, the better it gets. And that compounds over time. So what you don't have is the luxury of time, because effectively we have much less data, we have a lesser ability to continuously deploy these capabilities in production because of the slow pace of the bureaucracy of the US government. And when you compound the two and you add the 1.5 billion people competing against us, what you see is that if we don't proactively take this seriously, we will have no way to even be able to catch up a year from now. So we estimate the end date of waking up to be December 2022.
Yellen, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
The tight race for Virginia governor has entered the final week. President Biden made his second trip to the state to rally for the Democratic candidate, Terry McAuliffe.
I ran against Donald Trump. And Terry is running against an acolyte of Donald Trump.
McAuliffe is telling Virginians his Republican rival, Glenn Youngkin, is endorsed by former President Trump. Both parties are closely watching this contest for its national implications in next year's midterms. The election is next Tuesday, while early voting has increased more than 250% compared to 4 years ago. And Senator Cory Booker and Representative Jim McGovern introduced a bipartisan bill on Tuesday. It would start the process of convening a national White House conference on food, nutrition, hunger, and health. While unveiling a bill on Tuesday, Senator Cory Booker said that the nation is facing a nutrition crisis due to a policy failure, and big food companies are putting profit before public health.
It's about a decades-long policy failure to address deep-seated structural problems in our food systems that we in this nation are subsidizing to the tune of billions and billions of dollars.
Representative Jim McGovern mentioned that the White House had the first food conference over 50 years ago, and now it's time to have a second one.
We think the White House conference, with the president's backing, can give us the political will to come up with a holistic plan, and we can actually make some real progress here.
Lawmakers believe that hunger becomes a crisis only because of inaction. To address that, all parties need to be included. Ohio and 11 other states on Monday filed a lawsuit against the Biden administration, which has recently allowed taxpayer dollars to be used to fund abortions. The lawsuit, led by Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost, is joined by 11 other states. They're seeking to restore the Trump administration rule so that medical clinics cannot get funding from the Title X, a federal grant program toward performing or referring abortions. The Biden administration revoked this Trump-era rule on October 4th. And that's all we have for you on the Capitol Report today. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Steve Lance, and we'll see you next time.